In the year of 1619, African slaves were first brought to America. They were crammed into ships with really poor conditions. Once sold by slave traders, they were put out to work in fields, tend to children, and clean houses. If they were caught breaking the law or trying to escape, they would be whipped, leaving horrible scars, shot and killed, or hanged. If we fast forward a few decades, in 1793, Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, which increases the demand for slave labor. Also in that year, a federal law was enacted, providing the return of slaves who had escaped and crossed state lines. In 1808, Congress passes a law banning slave trade. In 1820, the Missouri Compromise banned slavery north of the 32nd parallel. In 1831, William Lloyd Garrison starts to publish a weekly paper named The Liberator, which promotes abolition of slavery. In the same year, a young preacher by the name of Nat Turner leads an uprising in Southampton County, Virginia. The revolt is captured by the town militia, and Turner is eventually hanged. In 1846, Frederick Douglass launches his abolitionist newspaper. And in the year of 1849, Harriet Tubman escapes from slavery and becomes one of the most effective leaders in the Underground Railroad. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe has her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, published, and it becomes one of the most popular anti-slavery novels. And in 1854, Congress passes the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which establishes territories of Kansas and Nebraska. Unfortunately, this repeals the Missouri Compromise, which stirs up old tensions between pro- and anti-slavery. And in 1857, the Dred Scott case concludes that Congress does not have the right to ban slavery in states and that slaves are not citizens. And in 1859, John Brown and 21 other followers launched a revolt and captured the arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. However, John is captured, tried, and hanged. And in 1861, the Deep South secedes, and the Confederacy is founded, and the Civil War begins. And 2 years later, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, finally ending slavery. But come on, who in the South is going to listen? Because this war goes on for another 2 years. By that time, the Civil War had ended, and President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Slavery in the U.S. was finally and effectively ended on June 19th, when 250 slaves in Texas got news that the war had ended 2 months earlier. And in that same year, the KKK is formed. And in 1868, the 14th Amendment is ratified, defining citizenship to those born in the U.S., including those born as slaves. And in 1870, the 15th Amendment is passed, permitting black men to vote. And in 1892, Ida B. Wells begins her campaign against the lynching of blacks. Then the Plessy v. Ferguson case in 1896 holds that racial segregation is constitutional, laying down a path for Jim Crow laws. Then a biracial group of activists establishes the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, in 1909. And 4 years later, Marcus Garvey founds the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or the UNIA, whose motto is One God, One Aim, One Destiny. And in 1936, Thurgood Marshall becomes the first African American to be appointed to the Supreme Court. And in 1954, the Brown v. Board decision declares that segregation in schools is illegal. And on December 2, 1955, Rosa Parks is arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white man on the bus. And 3 days later, the Montgomery bus boycott begins. It is led by Martin Luther King Jr. and lasts a total of 381 days. And in the year of 1963, Martin Luther King gives his I Have a Dream speech. Then in 1964, Congress passes the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination. 1 year later, in 1965, the Voting Rights Act authorizes direct federal intervention to enable blacks to vote. And on April 4th, 1968, James Earl Ray assassinates Martin Luther King. In the same year, Malcolm X is assassinated. And in 1967, Robert C. Weaver is appointed to Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and Edward Brooks becomes the first black to serve in the Senate since Reconstruction. And to conclude this presentation, on November 4th, 2008, Barack Obama is the first African American to be elected president.